This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, collective Munchausen around Trump. What an honor and a privilege it is to have with us today Dr. Gad Saad, the host of The Sad Truth. Gad, what an honor and privilege to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jamie.
Thank you. You've done some really brilliant analysis in this context of this syndrome and how it surrounds Trump. Before we get to that, though, Gad, why don't you just introduce yourself to our audience a little bit? Tell us about your background.
So I was born in Lebanon, of Jewish descent. So we were part of the last group of Lebanese Jews that were in Lebanon in the mid-'70s. And then when the Civil War broke out in 1975, it became very precarious to be Jewish in Lebanon. And so we had to leave under imminent, death threats or execution threats. And so we emigrated to Montreal, Canada, and that's it. There you have it. I'm a professor at Concordia University. I am a consumer and evolutionary psychologist.
Well, Gad, what an incredible story, and I think that we share something because the terror that you came from, the terror that I came from, when we run into these leftists who, after the Trump inauguration, are scared to come out of their house because they don't know if a black van might drive by and throw them into the back of the van and they'll disappear, so they're not sure if they can go to university class or something. This is what you started zeroing in on. There's some kind of hysteria here, and you talk about this syndrome. Why don't you tell us what your analysis and interpretation is?
So Munchausen Syndrome is an actual psychiatric condition that I had written about as part of my scientific career in a medical journal back in 2010. So Munchausen Syndrome is when someone feigns an illness so that they could then garner empathy and sympathy. Munchausen Syndrome by proxy is when, if you have somebody under your care, let's say your biological child, you'll harm that child so that you could then get the empathy and sympathy of, oh, poor you, you are the mother of a stricken child. And so I took this idea and I thought, well, a lot of what I'm seeing with this sort of faux victimhood surrounding the Trump victory was exactly Munchausen syndrome, but at the collective level, right? So you would see people on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, testifying to how fearful they were, as you pointed at the start of your question. They're afraid to go to class because I'm a woman of color, and I know that he is a rape apologist, and what's going to happen? Can I still go to class? So imagine the level of psychosis, the level of hysteria you must be experiencing to actually think that his ascending to the highest office is going to have a personal repercussion on your ability to go to class. And hence I coined that collective Munchausen.
Absolutely. And Gad, we know that the left very much needs this. Like all my life, I've observed them at their demonstrations. And, there's so many times I know, just off the top of my head, there was once, but this represented a million times. This woman is right up in the cop's face. She's screaming. She's yelling. She's at the epicenter of the world. And he's giving her the guidelines of what she can and can't do. She finally violates it. She's in the way of traffic or whatever they're doing. So he has to put his hands on her to arrest her. And she just begins to screech. And the atmosphere is that Nazi Germany is now here and they're fighting against fascism. What is this? But leftists very much need this. They provoke, and then they make they generate this mass hysteria that there's this great oppression, but they're triggering it all.
I think it really comes from, there's a quote that I used in my testimony in front of the Canadian Senate on a separate issue where I was talking about this victimhood mentality. And I argued that instead of talking about I think, therefore I am, the famous truism, I think that today's leftists believe in I'm a victim, therefore I am. So the currency by which they define their identity, right? I mean, a banker looks at the amount of currency, actual monetary currency that's in the bank to determine his or her position. They determine their identity, their worth, whether they win an argument or not, by how they score on this victimology scale. And therefore, when she attacks, that's perfectly fine. The minute that someone retaliates, she goes into this victimology hysteria. It's a grotesque psychiatric dysfunction.
Absolutely. And, you know, we see this, it's also obviously a very shrewd tactic of totalitarian movements, because even today, Gad, when we look carefully, when jihadists strike, if you watch very carefully now, they strike, so Muslims are killing non-Muslims, jihad strikes, and within 12 hours, our society is apologizing to Muslims for Islamophobia. So they attack, but somehow they're the victims.
Well, the perfect place that you see this is in the context of Israel, which, of course, my simply mentioning Israel now has just increased the hate mail tenfold. You could have, for 6 months, daily, rockets being launched on Israeli schoolyards. The minute that Israel attacks, you see a bunch of women come out on the street on the other side screaming. I won't imitate the Arabic sort of affectations, but saying, "Oh, why, God, why are they doing this to us?" Well, could it be that they are doing this to you because you've spent the last 4 months sending rockets against them? You're unable to see the link, the cause and effect link, but that's part of the mentality in that region. And you see it, by the way, with the faux victimhood claims that you're now seeing in the United States, right, where every day there's some new Islamophobic hate crime that turns out to be a hoax. That's part, again, of collective Munchausen.
Yeah, so with Munchausen, the person often can hurt themselves or pretend that they're hurt, or Munchausen by proxy. There's, I watched, some of these terrible documentaries. There was one on the ID channel recently. The woman was actually making her son sick, and he finally died just because she was enjoying all the attention she was getting on Facebook. So what, they really like the attention and pity that they get?
Exactly. And in a sense, I'm their worst nightmare, because the student who is at Wellesley College, right, a rather privileged school, outside of Boston, who's never experienced a day of hardship, but that wishes desperately to be viewed as a victim, will construct a narrative of victimology. Oh, I'm being cyberbullied. Oh, people have attacked me because I'm slightly overweight. And then when I take their faux victimhood and then I compare it to my own personal narrative, I say, oh, you want to hear what true victimology is? Let me tell you about my personal story. Then they're left baffled because they don't really know how to answer me, because I outgunned them, obviously, on the narrative that is most important to them. And in a sense, that's why I'm able to get away with a lot of things I can get away with, because the currency that matters most to them, I beat them on it.
Gad, absolutely, and my heart goes out to you, and I just want to say, everything you're saying resonates so much, because I don't think I need to get into details about being the child of Soviet dissidents from the Soviet Union, but in terms of what happened to our family in the Gulag, in terms of Soviet imperialism and what it did to the Ukrainians and what it did in Eastern Europe, when we came to Canada, and I listened to these leftists just moaning about how, CNN is just oppressing them every day. Why can't they have a Canadian channel or something? I don't know. It was just baffling to me what the leftist Canadian nationalists think is oppression, because I was always thinking, maybe if you were starved to death like the kulaks were, and how they even, God, they had to trade their dead babies with each other to eat. And it's just disgusting what the left thinks is oppression in our society.
And by the way, I should mention that I often will reference your book, United in Hate, which I read. You were very kind to, a few years ago, send me a copy. So fantastic job. And let me plug it again for you on your own show. If you guys haven't read that book, you need to read it, because it's a wonderful analysis of how the left and Islam are in bed together. It's simply breathtaking.
Okay, I know that Annie, the producer, is listening. Annie, make sure to send Gad his check right away. And Gad, you are automatically invited onto another show next week just for saying that. Thank you, Gad.
Thank you, buddy. Cheers.
Okay. So, Gad, let us move forward in the sense that we both understand and, you know, what the left is. And I'll even say when Ashley Judd was up on that stage after the Trump, and she's up there. And, you know, even Annie, you know, our producer, I mean, I think Annie could, you know, kind of enlighten Ashley Judd as to what real oppression of women is under Islamic gender apartheid in terms of female genital mutilation and forced marriage and forced veiling and acid attacks, etc. Why don't you talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, of your suffering and what happened to your family and those around you in Lebanon?
So, you know, I grew up in Lebanon. We were very well integrated within Lebanese society. There had been a Jewish community there for a very long time. But, you know, the writing was on the wall. Not to imply that anti-Semitism is strictly related to Israel, because genocidal Jew hatred is something that is independent of Israel. But what happened in the case of the Middle East at that point is every time there would be a conflict between Israel and its Arab neighbors, it would become that much more precarious to be Jewish in Arab lands. And so we were part of the last group of Jews that had remained in Lebanon. When the civil war broke out, it was simply impossible to be Jewish in Lebanon. Just to give you one example of many sort of daily death dangers that we faced, in Lebanon, you held an internal ID akin to a passport that you had to show, let's say, at a roadblock. If somebody asked you for that ID, you produce it. And on that ID is written your religion, because everything in the Middle East is viewed through the prism of religion. Now, Jews weren't even called Jews. They were called, so in Arabic, a Jew is Yahudi. We were called Israeli, Israelite. So in other words, it even increased the animus towards us even more. We were somehow stripped of our Lebanese identity because we were Israelites. Now, if you were stopped at a roadblock by one of the endless militias that would have been hostile to Jews, well, you were shot on the spot. And so it became imperative for us to leave Lebanon. Now, we left Lebanon in end of 75. Now, my parents kept going back to Lebanon after we immigrated to Canada. And then in 1980, they were kidnapped by Fatah. And they had disappeared. I think they were held in captivity for 8 days. Luckily, we were able, through various high connections, get them out. And since 1980, no one from my family has returned to Lebanon.
Oh my God, Gad, what a story. And in terms of, I think we could fairly say that there is some Islamic Arab racism and bigotry involved here towards non-Muslims and Jewish people. How many of your academic colleagues and the academics you know in your academic setting that are so concerned about racism, how many of them will be planning a protest on this matter and the continuing anti-Semitism and hatred of the kuffars, or we can say kafirs as well, in the Islamic world? What protests are coming up by your academic colleagues on this matter?
Not many. There's definitely certain types of positions that are perfectly acceptable within academia, and other ones are perfectly a manifestation of you being a racist, xenophobe, Nazi. So if you criticize Christianity, you know, all day and all night, then that's certainly a measure of how progressive you are. If you utter a single syllable that might be perceived as critical of Islam, well then, gee, you must be some hateful bigot. And so the double standard is simply astonishing. I'll give you one quick story that I've shared, you know, in previous settings. At one point on my personal Facebook page, I had shared a YouTube clip of an Iraqi astronomer who was arguing that the Earth is flat, and he used some Quranic passage to demonstrate that the Earth is genuinely flat. And so I shared this clip, not to bash on Muslims, but to actually make the point that, you know, perfectly intelligent people can have their brains parasitized by religion. And then one of my fellow scientists wrote, you know, why are you bashing these people? In other words, she wasn't upset that this scientist was holding such a laughable position. She was upset at me for pointing to his position. So when you have people who have such a broken truth compass, the battle is still, it's going to be tough to win it.
Yeah, and they very much need, you know, there's many reasons why they impose this blindness and amnesia, but you know, they also don't like it when their victimization is not seen as you say, just the worst kind of victimization in the world. Gad, we got to go, but you have so many brilliant things that you've said. So let's just end on this, and we'll bring you back and get deeper into this. There's a lot of leftists that are also afflicted with OPS, the Ostrich Parasitic Syndrome, and this is your interpretation. Why don't we leave with this? What is this terrible OPS syndrome?
So OPS, ostrich, is the metaphor of the ostrich that buries its head in the sand, which of course it doesn't do that, but it's become an apt metaphor for anyone who denies basic reality. And I use the term parasitic syndrome because it really is akin. The inability to see realities that are as clear as the existence of gravity is akin to a brain worm, a brain pathogen that enters your brain and completely reshuffles your brain circuitry, rendering you completely lobotomized. And there are many examples of this in many species where a brain worm can enter. For example, a mouse can be afflicted with a particular pathogen whereby it loses its innate fear of cats, right? And so I take this biological metaphor and then apply it to the daily realities that you and I see, whereby perfectly reasonable people become utterly buffoonishly ostrich-like in their behavior because they simply can't accept reality. So the collection of these types of rejections of realities I have coined ostrich parasitic syndrome, and that's going to be one of the key topics of my next book.
Well, Gad, does OPS by any chance have something to do with so many of these radical feminists that I've known all my life, and they go to these Islam demonstrations and anti-American demonstrations, and the feminist will be marching right alongside an Islamist screaming, Allahu Akbar. Is that OPS? That's OPS?
For example, Queers for Palestine is OPS, right? Let me just give you a very quick, I know we're short on time, a very quick other poignant example of OPS. There was an Israeli graduate student who did a study looking at how often do Israeli soldiers rape Palestinian women. She was hoping to find that there were many such instances. When she actually couldn't uncover a single documented case of the rape of Palestinian women by Israeli soldiers, this is how she interpreted it. The Israeli soldiers so dehumanize Palestinian women that they don't even consider them worthy of being raped. So if the Israeli soldiers had raped the women, they would have been evil Jews. And if they don't rape the women, they're evil Jews. That's OPS.
The Palestinian women, they're such victims because they don't get raped. This is the rationale of the left and, of course, of Islamic culture, right?
That is a problem we have to conquer.
Yeah. Gad, what an honor to have you on the show. There's going to be a lot of people, almost all of them, I would say, very inspired by this show, and they're going to want to find you. Where do they do so?
So if you just go on YouTube, I have a channel, as you pointed at the start of the show, called the Saad, S-A-A-D, Truth, where I interview people, I have lectures, all sorts of fun stuff. And then they could follow me on Twitter at Gad, G-A-D-S-A-A-D, and I also have a public Facebook page.
You're a busy man. Gad, be careful you don't catch collective Munchausen or OPS, okay?
I am immune to it.
You're immune. We need a vaccine. I think being from a totalitarian environment gives us a vaccine. Real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Jamie.
Thank you. And thank you for watching the Glazov Gang. Please remember, we're a fan-generated program. If you like us, go to jamieglazov.com to support the show. And if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang, please be subscribed. We'll see you on the next edition. Good night.